So recently, a group of archaeologists loaded a helicopter with what is basically a laser cannon, pointed it at a piece of Amazon jungle that looked completely normal, and found out the forest was lying. From the air, it was just what you picture when you hear Amazon. Endless canopy, river like a brown snake, nothing but green to the horizon. On their laptops, it turned into something else. Straight lines, right angles, long raised strips running out from central platforms like spokes on a wheel. It was a road map under a rainforest. The way LiDAR works is almost rude. You fly over in a grid pattern, firing hundreds of thousands of laser pulses every second down through the canopy. Most of those hit leaves and branches and bounce back quickly. A tiny fraction keep going until they smack into the ground. You collect all those return times and turn them into a point cloud, millions of dots that tell you where the skin of the earth really is. Then you strip away everything that is not ground, and suddenly the forest stops being this uniform green rug and becomes a terrain full of ridges, ditches, mounds, and, in this case, lines so straight they may as well have been drawn with a ruler. On one of those flights over a savanna forest mosaic in the southwestern Amazon, the team saw something big. Not one or two mounds, not a single defensive ditch, a whole urban layout. A central hub with massive platform mounds, something like pyramids in earth, plazas, and from that core, raised causeways radiating outward for kilometers, connecting to smaller sites along the way. On the laptop, it looked less like a random scatter of ruins and more like someone had taken a city plan, laid it gently across a floodplain, and then walked away for 600 years while the trees grew back over it. Up close, the big sites had names like Kotoka and Landivar in the modern papers, but the culture behind them has been tagged the Kasarabe. They were living there roughly from the middle of the first millennium after Christ to just before Europeans showed up on the continent. When the LiDAR images were first cleaned up, the archaeologists kept zooming out, expecting the pattern to thin out. Instead, they kept finding more. Not one big city and some random satellites, but a 4-level hierarchy of settlements, a few huge centers, a ring of medium towns, smaller villages, and then hamlets, all tied together with these raised roads and canals like some pre-Columbian highway system. The roads were what really mess with people's heads. In a rainforest, natural drainage lines wander, animal paths meander. These causeways did not. They ran straight for long stretches. Even when the ground underneath dipped and rose, even when they had to cross old riverbeds or swampy depressions. They were raised above the surrounding terrain, edged with berms, sometimes flanked by ditches for water management. Some of them pointed almost perfectly along cardinal directions. Others clearly connected specific pairs of settlements like arteries between organs. Think about the amount of coordination it takes to do that without metal tools, without an alphabet, without a single wheel in sight. Somebody had to stand on a platform, point toward a distant patch of forest and say, "We are going to build a road there." Then hundreds of people had to drag soil and sod and logs season after season to raise that line, tamp it down, maintain it through rainy years and dry ones. A path that goes in a straight line for several kilometers does not just happen because people walk in the same place a lot. That happens when someone decides the landscape is going to match the geometry in their head. The other thing LiDAR showed was that this was not some one-off miracle. Once the news got out, teams started looking at other LiDAR datasets collected for forest studies, carbon projects, and land management, and they kept finding signs of human geometry hiding under the trees. Geometric earthworks in Acre in western Brazil, where squares and circles are linked by straight bermed roads. Circular mound villages in southwestern Amazonia with sunken roads arranged in ranked pairs, oriented to the compass and connecting sites like beads on a string. Settlement patterns in other parts of the basin where faint lines between mounds suddenly popped out as planned routes once the canopy was stripped away. Then a team took LiDAR data from across the basin and ran a basin-wide analysis. This was not one focused survey over a single cultural area. They pulled every bit of publicly available LiDAR they could get, forest inventory flights, carbon projects, little strips of data accidents. Buried in those patches, they found 24 new pre-Columbian earthwork complexes that nobody had documented before, some with clear straight roads between shapes, and then they did the math. Based on how often those sites showed up in the small portion of the forest that has LiDAR coverage, they estimated that more than 10,000 similar earthworks could still be hiding beneath the canopy across Amazonia. 10,000 pieces of a road and city network that our maps still show as blank. LiDAR did not create the story, it just gave the jungle an X-ray. Long before the lasers showed up, archaeologists working on the ground have been saying the Amazon is not an untouched wilderness. People have been modifying this place intentionally for thousands of years. You had folks digging in terra preta, that dark, human-made soil enriched with charcoal, bone, and organic waste, spreading along riverbanks and into the forest interior like a fingerprint of long-term farming. You had geoglyphs, huge geometric ditches and cleared ranch land, showing that people were engineering the land in western Brazil 2,000 years ago and more. You had indigenous communities today in places like the Upper Singu living in ringed villages with radiating roads and carefully managed forests that looked suspiciously like what the LiDAR teams were seeing in Bolivia, just in a different material and century. Put the aerial lasers together with that ground truth and the picture starts to sharpen. These ancient roads were not just convenient paths. They were the bones of a whole way of living that you could call garden urbanism, not dense stone cities crammed into a tight footprint, but networks of towns, ceremonial centers, and farms spread out across a landscape in a way that worked with seasonal floods instead of trying to ignore them. Roads and canals were the connective tissue. If you were standing on one of those causeways at the time, you would not have seen a jungle. You would have seen a managed mosaic. Floodplain fields raised just high enough that crops could breathe during the wet season. Fish ponds connected to canals where trapped water could be harvested during the dry months. Forest patches thick with useful trees that your grandparents planted or tended, fruit, nuts, medicine, construction wood. The road under your feet would be the dry route through all of that, a guarantee that even in the peak of the rains you could walk from your home village to the big mound center for rituals, festivals, or trade without wading chest deep in mud. Those roads also show you how far the old narrative missed the point. For a long time, the story outsiders told about the Amazon was that the soil was too poor to support anything more sophisticated than scattered bands of hunter-gatherers. Early European explorers came through and described towns along the riverbanks, dense populations, cultivated fields as far as you could see. Later travelers did not find those. They paddled for days and saw only forest and a few small villages. So historians shrugged and said, the first guys were exaggerating. They were fantasizing or lying. Turns out the first guys were probably telling the truth, and the people they met were wiped out by waves of disease and violence before the second wave of visitors ever showed up. When you drain a bath, the ring of soap scum left on the tub tells you where the water used to be. These roads and earthworks and terra preta are like that ring. You can have a forest regrow over everything in a few generations, but the dirt keeps the geometry. The LiDAR beams are just the flashlight angle you need to see it. If you follow one of those ancient roads outward from a big Casarabe center on the Bolivian side, you hit smaller nodes along the way. Secondary sites with their own platforms and ponds, little clusters of mounds that might have been specialized communities, a place known for ceramic production, another for processing fish, another where certain ceremonies happened. The road is not just an empty lane, it is a schedule. Dry season, you might be moving goods, salt, dried fish, pottery, plant products. Wet season, it might be a tight, elevated line between patches of higher ground that are the only safe spots when the savanna turns into shallow lake. Back up in northwestern Brazil, in Acre, some of the geoglyph complexes show similar features. You have these big, square, or circular earthworks, sometimes in pairs, connected by straight bermed roads. One LiDAR example shows D-shaped enclosures linked to a square and a rectangle by roads that are dead straight for hundreds of meters, even though the modern forest tries to hide that fact. It is a different culture, different local materials, but the same habit. Mark the earth with shapes and tie them together with deliberate lines. If you go the other direction in the basin, toward Ecuador, the pattern shows up again in a different costume. In the Upano Valley, laser scans have revealed a network of ancient towns and agricultural fields built 2,500 years ago along mountain foothills, with roads connecting monumental centers to outlying farms and villages. Those roads snake more than the ones in the flat Bolivian plains because of the terrain, but they serve the same function. They turn a patchwork of settlements into a system. We came into this with mental maps that treated the Amazon as a kind of green ocean inhabited by scattered canoes. LiDAR is telling us that in many places, under the modern forest, it was more like an archipelago of cities and garden towns linked by causeways and canals. Not every part of the basin, not in one huge empire, but in multiple regions. At different times, indigenous engineers built networks at a scale we only believed in when we talked about the Andes or Mesoamerica. If you want to imagine what it feels like to walk one of those roads today, picture this. You are on a field crew sweating before breakfast. Someone with a handheld GPS and a printout of the LiDAR data is leading, calling over their shoulder, "We are on it." It should be rising right now. For a while, you are just pushing through undergrowth on what feels like flat ground. Then your boots start to tell you something different. The soil underfoot lifts by a meter, maybe two. The sides fall away into shallow swales. The vegetation shifts a little because water drains off the top faster than the surrounding forest floor. You realize you are walking a spine, a human-made elevation that keeps your feet drier and your line of sight straighter. Every few dozen meters, you see signs that the thing has been there a long time. Large, mature trees growing right out of the crown of the road. Old root systems gripping the berms like claws. In places, erosion has bitten into the edges and exposed the structure underneath. Layers of packed earth, maybe some old fill with different textures where people rebuilt it after a flood. You start to understand what those repeating patterns in the LiDAR data actually mean in your body. It is not a line on a screen. It is a choice under your feet, repeated by thousands of footsteps over centuries. The weirdest part is when that ancient road intersects with something modern. There are places now where a bulldozed path for a logging truck runs right across a pre-Columbian causeway. From above, you get two completely different generations of straight lines in the same image. The old one, raised and subtle, built to move feet and maybe litters or cargo on shoulders. The new one, carved down into the soil for tires and diesel. The first tells you about a society that planned for seasonal water, fish, floods, and the needs of people on foot. The second tells you about the needs of an industry whose time scale is one human investment cycle. There is a dark joke in there. For decades, one of the easiest ways for scientists to find ancient earthworks in the Amazon was to look at satellite images of deforestation. Wherever ranching or large-scale agriculture pushed into the forest, clear cuts with that fishbone pattern of a road in side spurs, you would suddenly see big geometric shapes appear. Ditches, mounds, circles, squares. The chainsaws were doing the clearing that made the old geometry visible. You can look at certain stretches of the southern Amazon now and see modern fishbone clearing patterns laid down right over older indigenous land shapes. One set of roads cutting across another. Time is not on the side of the buried roads. In places like the Llanos de Mojos, mechanized agriculture is rolling over mound and causeway complexes. Every new field leveled by a tractor is a piece of that ancient grid scraped flat. Researchers have warned that at the current pace, a pre-Columbian structure disappears under a plow or a pasture every month or so. LiDAR, in that sense, is a rescue tool. It lets you grab a three-dimensional snapshot of these systems before they are physically erased, to at least document their existence and, if there is political will, argue for protecting key parts of them. The effect on how people think about the Amazon should be permanent. For a long time, the image most outsiders had was of a pristine wilderness with a few small indigenous groups living lightly and randomly on the land. That story was convenient because it made the forest look like a blank slate. Put a road here, a cattle ranch there, a mine there, and you could still tell yourself you were improving something that had never been developed. The LiDAR maps are basically standing in the doorway and saying no. People built complex things here long before anyone showed up with a European flag. The forest is full of history you just did not see. At the same time, it is important not to flip to the opposite extreme and start talking like someone found a lost Amazonian Rome with marble forums and chariots. The roads and cities under the jungle are impressive, but they are still the work of societies using earth, wood, fiber, fire, and water, not steel and fossil fuel. They were not building skyscrapers. They were building longevity. The causeways and canals you see in LiDAR are tuned to the rhythm of the rivers and the rain, not fighting them. Raised fields catch silt and stay fertile. Ponds hold fish. Terra preta patches hold nutrients for generations. The roads tie all of that together in a way that makes walking the landscape similar to leafing through a well-organized manual. That is where the story loops back to the present. The same tools we are using to uncover the ancient road networks are also being used to plan modern conservation. If you can see where ancient roads, fields, and settlements cluster, you can make better decisions about which areas to prioritize for protection. You can say, this region is not just rich in biodiversity. It is a library of human land management experiments that we have barely begun to read. You can also see where modern roads are chewing through the densest patches of ancient infrastructure and decide whether that is a line you are willing to cross. There is a human side to this that goes beyond the tech. For a lot of indigenous people living in the Amazon today, the LiDAR stories are not surprising. They are confirmation. Their oral histories have always said that there were big centers upriver, huge gatherings, long journeys along paths that do not exist anymore. They have stories about ancestors who built roads in the forest and cities of gardens, stories that non-indigenous scholars dismissed as exaggeration because there was not enough visible evidence left. When they see the laser maps plastered all over newspapers and conference slides now, they are watching the outside world catch up to what their grandparents have been telling them their whole lives. If you strip it all the way down, these ancient roads are really just physical proof of something simple. Cities do not have to be concrete and glass to be cities. You can build urban life out of packed earth, canals, trees, and long-term attention. You can tie your neighborhoods together with roads that are also levees, that are also lines of sight to the horizon, that are also walks you make every year to celebrate the turning of the seasons. You can have plazas where the main monuments are not stone statues but carefully shaped hills, ponds, and orchards. When you see that in LiDAR cross-section and then stand on it in the heat and the insects, you start to realize that our definition of what counts as a real city has been embarrassingly narrow. We have been looking for stone and straight street grids and ignoring earthen cities that lasted centuries in floodplains and were smart enough not to cover everything in impermeable surfaces. In some ways, the ancient roads under the Amazon feel more futuristic than the asphalt ones being laid down now. The pre-Columbian networks were built to slow water, spread nutrients, and move people without engines. They embedded storage of food, of fertility, of cultural meaning right into the infrastructure. Our current roads in that same basin often do the opposite. They speed water off the land, encourage erosion, open up frontiers for quick exploitation, and fragment habitats. One system was designed to keep a place working for many generations. The other is mostly designed to get trucks from point A to point B as quickly as possible over the span of a few decades. The lasers did not reveal an alien civilization. They revealed a mirror. You look at those faint, glowing lines under the trees, and you are seeing another version of what humans do when they stay somewhere long enough. We make agreements with each other and with the land. We decide where we walk, where we plant, where we gather, where we bury our dead, and then we reinforce those decisions with ditches and walls, and, in this case, roads that run arrows straight through a place the rest of the world thought was trackless.